Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Tonight, we're wandering into the peculiar world of medieval food culture, specifically the snacks and treats that ordinary people ate when they weren't sitting down to formal meals. Not the grand banquets you might imagine, but the actual, messy, sometimes questionable street food that kept medieval folks going between breakfast and supper. Before we begin, if you find this content helpful for relaxation, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely brings you peace. And if you'd like, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your location. It's always interesting to know who's drifting off alongside us. Now settle in, adjust your pillow, let your breathing slow naturally. Maybe turn on a gentle fan for soft background noise. We're going to ease into tonight's journey together, one calm sentence at a time. The medieval appetite. Medieval people ate differently than we do. Their main meals were breakfast and dinner, with supper being a lighter affair in the evening. But between these structured eating times, people still got hungry. Workers in fields, craftsmen in workshops, travelers on roads. They all needed quick bites to sustain their energy throughout long, physically demanding days. Street vendors appeared in market squares and outside church gates, selling portable foods from wooden trays or small carts. These weren't restaurants or shops in the modern sense. They were temporary setups, often just a person with a basket, calling out to passers-by. The food was cheap, fast, and designed to be eaten with your hands while standing or walking. Hygiene was not a priority. There were no health inspectors, no regulations about temperature control or ingredient freshness. If the food smelled acceptable and the price was right, people bought it. Most medieval folks had strong stomachs from a lifetime of questionable meals, so what might horrify us today was perfectly normal to them. The selection varied by season and location. Coastal towns offered different snacks than inland villages. What was available in summer disappeared in winter. And regional specialties meant that a traveler moving from one kingdom to another might encounter entirely new foods, some delicious, others deeply suspicious. But certain snacks appeared across medieval Europe with remarkable consistency. Let's explore some of them now, slowly and carefully, letting each one settle into your mind like a warm, heavy blanket. Roasted chestnuts. In autumn and winter, when the air turned cold and damp, roasted chestnuts became the comfort food of choice. Vendors would set up small braziers, flat metal pans filled with glowing coals, and roast chestnuts until their shells cracked and blackened. The smell was irresistible. Sweet, smoky, and warm, it cut through the chill of medieval streets. People would buy a small cloth bag full, holding the hot chestnuts in their hands for warmth while walking through market squares or returning home from church. Eating them required patience. The shells were scorching hot, and peeling them too quickly meant burnt fingers. But once opened, the soft, sweet flesh inside was worth the wait. It tasted like autumn itself, earthy and mild, filling your stomach without being too heavy. Chestnuts weren't just tasty, they were practical. They grew abundantly in forests across Europe, making them cheap and accessible. Poor families often relied on them as a staple food, boiling or roasting them to stretch their meals. But even wealthier folks enjoyed them as a treat, a simple pleasure that crossed class boundaries. Vendors often worked late into the evening, their braziers glowing in the darkness like small beacons. The warmth, the smell, and the ritual of cracking open each chestnut created a moment of comfort in an otherwise harsh world. People lingered near the vendors, chatting with neighbors, warming their hands, letting the day's worries fade into the smoky night air. Meat pies from street vendors. Meat pies were everywhere in medieval towns. Small, hand-sized pastries filled with chopped meat, onions, and gravy, they were the ultimate portable meal. You could buy one from a street vendor, eat it while walking, and be satisfied for hours. The crust was thick and sturdy, designed to hold the filling without falling apart. It wasn't always meant to be eaten. In some cases, the pastry shell was more like an edible container, tough and plain, protecting the meat inside. Wealthier people might discard the crust after eating the filling, while poorer folks ate everything, grateful for the extra calories. What went into the filling was anyone's guess. Vendors used whatever meat was available and affordable: pork, mutton, rabbit, pigeon, sometimes eel or fish. Occasionally, the meat was past its prime, masked by heavy seasoning and generous amounts of pepper or herbs.
But most people didn't ask questions. They were hungry, the pie was hot, and that was enough. The pies were baked in communal ovens or portable clay ovens that vendors carried from place to place. The smell of baking pastry and roasting meat drew crowds. On market days, pie sellers competed loudly for customers, shouting about their superior ingredients and unbeatable prices. Eating a meat pie was a messy affair. The gravy often leaked through cracks in the crust, dripping onto fingers and clothing. There were no napkins, so people wiped their hands on their tunics or simply licked them clean. It wasn't elegant, but it was satisfying. A moment of warmth and flavor in an otherwise bland diet. Dried fruit and honeyed nuts. For those who could afford luxury, dried fruit and honeyed nuts were prized snacks. Figs, dates, raisins, and apricots were imported from warmer climates and sold at premium prices. They were intensely sweet and exotic. Vendors displayed them in small wooden bowls, sometimes offering samples. The fruit was often coated in honey or dusted with spices like cinnamon, making it even more decadent. Honeyed nuts, usually almonds or walnuts, were roasted and coated in warm honey. The result was crunchy, sticky, and sweet. People ate them slowly, savoring each piece. These snacks weren't just food, they were status symbols. Eating them in public signaled that you had money to spare and time to enjoy. But even the wealthy didn't eat these treats carelessly. Sugar and honey were expensive, and fruit from distant lands carried risk. So when people did indulge, they appreciated the rarity. Fried dough and sweet pastries. Long before donuts existed, medieval cooks were frying dough in hot oil and selling it on street corners. These early fried pastries were simple flour, water, and sometimes eggs, shaped into circles or twisted strips and plunged into bubbling fat. The result was crispy outside, soft inside, and deeply satisfying. Some vendors sprinkled them with coarse sugar if they had it, or drizzled them with honey. Frying was done in large iron pots over open flames. The oil, usually rendered pork fat, was reused repeatedly. This added a distinct flavor that medieval folks found comforting. Children loved these treats. They would gather around vendors, watching the dough sizzle, waiting impatiently for their turn. Adults ate them too, especially during festivals when spending coins on something frivolous felt justified. The pastries were best eaten immediately, while still hot. Cheese and bread. Not all medieval snacks were elaborate. Sometimes, the simplest combinations were the most satisfying. A chunk of hard cheese and a piece of bread formed the backbone of countless quick meals. The cheese was aged, firm, and intensely flavored. The bread, usually coarse and dark, was dense and filling. Together, they provided protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Vendors sold cheese in small wedges, wrapped in cloth. Bread was sold by the loaf or slice. People would buy both and eat them throughout the day as needed. This wasn't fancy food. It was fuel, plain and simple. But it was reliable and affordable. Everyone knew the comfort of bread and cheese. Pickled vegetables. Preserving food was essential in the medieval world, and pickling was one of the most common methods. Cucumbers, onions, cabbage, and turnips were packed into clay jars with vinegar, salt, and spices, then left to ferment. The result was sour, salty, and surprisingly addictive. Pickled vegetables were aggressively tart, puckering your mouth with every bite. But they were also refreshing, especially after eating heavy, greasy foods. Street vendors sold them from large jars, using wooden tongs to fish out individual pieces. Customers would eat them on the spot, wincing at the sourness but coming back for more. The smell of pickling brine was strong and unmistakable. It filled market stalls and street corners, mingling with the scent of roasting meat and baking bread. The end of the day. As evening approached and vendors began packing up their wares, the streets slowly emptied. The sounds of haggling and cooking faded, replaced by the quiet murmur of families heading home. Leftover snacks were eaten by the vendors themselves or given to the poor. Nothing went to waste in medieval life. Medieval street food wasn't glamorous or clean. It was often greasy, salty, and of questionable origin. But it was real and necessary. It sustained millions of people across centuries, providing comfort, energy, and a brief moment of pleasure in lives that were often hard and unforgiving. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, imagine those medieval streets. The smell of roasting chestnuts warming cold hands. The sound of vendors calling out their wares in cheerful competition. The taste of warm bread and sharp cheese satisfying simple hunger. Let those images carry you gently into peaceful rest. Good night.